All right, believe it or not, it is almost the end of October. How time
Wild.
flies. Get crazy. I can't believe it. Halloween is here. Christmas is
Yeah.
2 months away. It always blows my mind when we're closer to Christmas than we are the middle of summer. Like it still feels like summer was just here. The middle of summer was much further than Christmas is coming up the pipe. So yeah, the time is speeding up as you get older. Just blows my mind. For people following the podcast, your market streams have changed, evolved throughout the year. You were started
Yep.
just farmers market. You had some drops and stuff you were doing. Right now, as it stands, what's your market stream look like now, and what will it look like continuing into, let's say, January 1st? How do you view this? Also with market, can't remember when your market shuts down. How does the trajectory look between here and the end of the year?
So the end of the year is more or less figured out. We will, for the month of October, we've been doing this sort of rogue producers only market. They decided, the powers that be, market manager and such, decided that they were going to take the month of October off for the market and then come back for November and December. And I pushed really hard to not do that, but the decision was already made. So I rallied with the other farmers from the market and we decided to do like producers only. So I showed up every Saturday through October. We've had a couple of good ones, one really bad one this past week, but starting back at the first of the month of November, we'll be back into kind of the regularly sanctioned market for that. And then about half of December. And then at that point, we're touching on Christmas. And so and that'll be when the market will end for the year. And then we're doing two restaurants right now. One that's been touch and go. Funny enough, it was the restaurant that was like the consistent one, my first one, whatever. And then as we've transitioned into fall, we haven't really, we keep missing each other. Like they want stuff when I don't have it. I have stuff when they don't want it, so on and so forth. So I haven't delivered there in almost a month, but picked up another restaurant across the street from the market, which has been great. And that's been a consistent every single week. Basically, like I'll take whatever you can get me. And so that's where things stand for the rest of the year is this one restaurant sale or this one restaurant account in the farmers market. And then we're trying to get this co-op CSA market thing off the ground, and it perpetually seems to be a week away. I'll touch back with an update if and when we ever get that going.
So your farmers market it's April through the end of the year with October off would be the official date.
Yeah.
I could see new farmers thinking about this so you'd have January, February, March off. How do you view, excuse me, that void of market income? If a farmer's market your main income stream, you have to say, do you plan ahead thinking, okay, I have to save some money for those 3 months because no income's coming in? You develop alternative market streams to keep cash flow coming in to make up that time. You pick up another market. There's winter markets in certain areas. And I know that was a talk
Yep.
at some point there. Let's say you weren't doing the winter's market or that doesn't play out. How would 3 months of no market affect how you planned?
Oh man, yeah, this is exactly where we're at. We're trying to stay ahead of the curve and not be reactionary and be proactive with planning for, yeah, January, February, March. Really, I would say half of December, because Christmas time it's not a cheap time of year. There's lots of parties, there's lots of dinners and so on and so forth. And so it's not like we'll just hunker down and spend no money. It's Christmas time. We're in America. It's going to be a lot of money spending for most people. And so I would say, as of now, I think the two pronged approach will be, one, try to save as much as we can. We got, after filing our taxes late after an extension, we were able to get a bit of a refund, which is nice. And I think we decided to basically sit on that as much as we can and let that sort of be our holdover emergency fund, more or less, to get us through the new year. And then If the winter market thing doesn't happen, or if we don't really feel like it's working out, if we do go that direction, we'll just really try to push the restaurant sales as much as possible. I feel like at that point, everyone will be slim. So if I'm able to actually theoretically offer more, if I don't have to do the dance of, all right, I need 10 pounds of arugula to make bags for the market, and the restaurant needs, or this restaurant needs 10 pounds and this restaurant needs five. If I just have the two, then maybe I can do 15 to one or 10 to both or whatever. And it'll definitely, I'm anticipating a slower time of year. Like we probably won't be grossing the same in sales that we are now. But if we can at least have enough between that little bit of savings and our continued restaurant sales, hopefully that'll at least get us through the wintertime. And then come springtime, we can really hit the ground running and try to make up some, not lost time, but catch back up, get the ball rolling. And then maybe summertime we'll be able to, because it'll probably slim out just a little bit depending on what we do. And then, yeah, trying to figure out what that winter rhythm will be. It's definitely an unknown. It's a little scary.
Yeah, gonna have to plan production as though you're gonna sell it all. So you keep growing regardless.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna need product to sell if you have
Mm-hmm.
markets and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of inherent risk in that of taking on the cost, labor of doing that, not knowing if you sell it. This is one of those new farmer, I don't even know what to call it, but just figure it out.
Yeah.
You don't have a pattern of past years to look at. You don't have this robust market stream of restaurants that has carried with you all year. So you can just ride in. So this is the first gap you'll have potentially. And then until you get back into, I guess it's April, right? Yes. So there you got to make it through that. Would you try and pick up other restaurants during that time? Or is it
Theoretically,
because you'll have inherently there's less production in the winter, shorter days, colder weather, stuff growing slower, not as much to sell. So you can't go as fast as you could in July. That being said, you'd love to sell everything that you're growing, but there's also
yeah.
time in there to take a break, do other projects, that thing. So how do you think about that, weighing the care of crops, working on selling versus catching up on other stuff, getting a little just R&R, all that.
I think my heart says enjoy the winter, take things easy, catch up on projects, work on the other kind of secondary things that you wanted to get going, merch, value add stuff or whatever. But my brain kind of says, let's just try to crank out as much as we can. And this is our first winter is not the winter to take a break. It's to just push it because we have no idea. And the way I see it is I'd much rather invest my energy and time into surviving through that and trying to keep, if we can, maybe we can not have to really dip into any sort of savings and we can actually afford to just keep the ball rolling. And then we come into springtime, and instead of, all right, we dipped into our reserves and now we got to really hustle to try to get those back, we can say, look, we've got this much, this grand or however many grand we have set aside. We can invest that in infrastructure. We can invest that in more fertilizer or this or that, whatever. And it's the way I see it is there will be a natural lag just in the simple fact that the days will be shorter. My hours will be limited. But I think at this point, I'm more or less leaning toward let's just try and crank out as much production because also, too, I, I do have a little bit more of an idea of what to expect this winter. One, this will be my third winter at Crystal Organic, and we don't lay any seasonal people off. We don't have anybody that's seasonal. We just go, we truck on through all through the wintertime. And their production, obviously, like sales will dip, but production in a way doesn't really, like we're just as busy doing stuff. And I was growing at this point last year, for better or for worse, I was growing some on this property. So I know how lettuce does in this tunnel with sunlight. I know how turnips do. I know how tatsoi does. I know how broccolini does out in the field, kale, all that sort of stuff. I know what to expect as long as the weather is works in our favor. But even then, we had some really cold days last year, and we survived. And I feel a little bit more confident actually going through it that we can keep some level of production. There's no stopping. We're going to be trying to just crank out as much as we can. Honestly, I think it's just this is not the winter to really try to take it easy. Now there will be some projects like we're in the process of acquiring a second greenhouse. Probably about 6 months too late. We should have done this earlier in the year so it was ready to go. But if I end up getting that this week, we can get it set up over the next 2 months. Maybe we can have something planted that can some quick growing stuff, maybe through that hunger gap end of February into March sort of time period. If not, it'll at least give us a big jump on spring. And so there will definitely be some non-production things that we'll be working on just by the necessity of that. But I'm going to try and focus on cranking as much out as we can just to see what's possible with the amount of space that I have and with my knowledge and my sales outlets. Like, how much can we crank out? Can we bring enough to justify a winter market every week for January and February and do restaurants? And so it's still so trial and error that I'd rather give it the old college try, and then it will give me a better idea of how to handle next year. Maybe we can be like, oh, we really can handle a certain level of production. So let's plan on maybe we take summer light, summer easy, and go on a vacation or whatever. And then winter, we really hit hard, or realize, yeah, we just can't meet a certain level of production. So we just need to plan on winter being slim and try and set money aside accordingly.
One of those years you have to live through to see it, because the
Yep.
market could be amazing. You just don't know. That's the wild card in all this. So it makes planning really hard because it's all this what ifs. What if it is great? What if it's not great? And if you know it stinks ahead of time, well, you plan on other things and you do those things. If you know it's amazing, great, let's gear up and do everything we can, and we'll figure out the projects around the other way, because right now cash matters. I
Yep.
think the winter projects thing could be a whole episode in of itself of
Yeah.
here's what I have, here's what I'd love to have on the farm, and here's 3 months and a limited budget. What can I actually change and look to improve? So maybe we can take that on in a future episode. One thing I do want to hit on today, I asked you this in advance, putting myself and a new farmer's spot. Somebody wants to start farming in 2025. You came through, you farmed for a full year now in 24 and part of 23. So you'd be really close to where I am. What are lessons you learned this year? Big things that really stand out related to running a business. And I made sure to say this is not compartmentalized to farming. It could be growing, business, management, time management, life, whatever.
Yeah. First and foremost, I would say if you can dedicate a certain amount of time to just strictly build out, you don't put a single seed in the ground. I don't know. Maybe you start something like leeks or whatever that are going to take absolutely forever. But other than that, you give yourself a solid 6 months at least. Obviously, I had a little bit of an unfair advantage of there was already a hoop house that was there. Obviously, we had to reskin it, and wash pack was already there. So there was a lot of upstart things that were taken care of. So maybe it really is like you take the first year. If you can swing it and it's just a side hustle, or it's a weekend and an evening thing and you just build slow. In hindsight, I would have much rather have taken more time to focus on strictly build out, get beds built, get beds made, so that when I'm ready to start production, I can start at a much higher level of production. I feel like one of our big struggles this year has been the ramp up in production. It went from, instead of saying we go from 0 to 50, where it's like, all right, it's time to start growing for summer when the market takes off or whatever. I actually started with, here's all these plants that I had in trays that I was getting ready to put in my home plot at our old house that would have essentially, it was a little eighth of an acre. I think I had 10 beds, nothing really big. And it was essentially like, I guess since I have all these plants, I'll go ahead and put them in the ground and let's try to get something going and try to start making some money as soon as possible. I feel like that was a temptation that I fell for, was like, we need to make money ASAP. But the thing was, is because I backed myself into that corner of we have to make money ASAP, that rubbed up against my time of being at the other farm. So then I felt like I was probably a little premature in needing to take time off to prepare for the market. And so it was just one of those things that I feel like if I would have been able to push off production to maybe say summertime, and then I can just jump on a few markets here and there and make some money and sell to some restaurants after I know that I can grow it. And I've built out all 32 beds for my my two main sections. I would have put myself in a much better situation. I would have basically deferred some of that gain and potential off a few months, like 3 or 4 months, as opposed to finding myself in this time come February, March, where, and we talked about this in those early episodes, where we're balancing build out and production at the same time. And so I would say first and foremost, if try to budget enough time to get as much basic build out done as you can, so that you can, and then as if you realize production can pick up, you have the real estate, you have the elbow room to be able to get stuff in there. Because that was an issue. I probably would have had a much more successful summer if I had more beds that I could have planted more tomatoes in, or more peppers, or more eggplant, or more cucumbers, the things that would have really sold really well. But because I was limited on physical real estate of beds and kind of the way that I'm growing, I can't just make beds happen like that. I was limited in how much production I could do over the summer because I basically put off build out. And you still to this day, I finished a bed today and then planted broccolini because it's like begging to get out of the seed house and get in the ground. So I'm still, because of that, still dealing with this whole production is basically production is pushing me to have to do build out when production calls for it, as opposed to I have everything done and then I can just fill it as I need it. That was a long answer, but
yeah, no, it's good. It's really good. I think it's well explained. That is one that resonates with me. So I'm coming at this from the non-farmer business owner perspective. That's the path I would try and take. I want the layout done for the most part. Now there is some nuance here of, if you had 2.5 acres, you have to be realistic on how many bed blocks you put in initially, and you put in 150 beds, and you might not need those until year 4. That's wasted. So you probably overshoot a little bit of what you think you need in year 1. Or if it's a smaller property, I think, okay, I'll max it out. If I only had half an acre or something, like put them all in, because you can always tarp them. That's the good thing about beds. Versus if I test a new product, I come out with product X. If I make a whole bunch of it or buy a whole bunch of it and I misstep an error, I'm sitting on all this physical inventory I have capital into. I have to store it and find some way to get rid of it to try and get that money back out of the product. The good thing about beds are they're your machinery, they're your production, means of production, but they don't cost you any money. It takes you some time and labor money to build them. Maybe you throw a little compost on there, but that's relatively inexpensive. And then you throw something over so the weeds stay out of the beds and they can just sit there. So you're not tying up capital, but you give yourself future optionality to dip into those beds should you need it, and they're more or less immediately ready. That's my one thought. The other thought is, I'm somebody who it's hard for me to, let's say, clean the kitchen and make dinner at the same time. They're two separate jobs. And if you think about it, a farm build out, that's essentially, I think at one point in time you talked about doing landscape design or installs. That's really what some people pay somebody to come in and do, if you're a residential customer, landscape my yard, put in some garden beds, put in the flowers, the irrigation, all that. Like they have a crew come in and do that. So that's really a whole big thing. And I've never set up a whole farm, but when I just think about the complexity of beds, irrigation, if you have to do anything with fencing, if there's a seed starting greenhouse or prop house that you have, and cool room, fridges, all that stuff, there's a massive amount there. And you want to lay it out right. You want to lay it out efficiently. If you're trying to do that on the fly while you're doing other things, you're probably cutting corners like we've talked about in the past. So there is that too, for when I think about that of, all right, do the setup. Now we've started, we have some room to expand, and we can just focus on growing now, not building. There's also this no longer, I don't know if you get this, but I'll have this thing of there's always or period something comes up and I don't really want to do it, but I know I
Yeah.
have to do it. And it's always in my back of the mind of, oh, you got to do that one thing. And it's just nagging me. Where once the farm's built out,
Hmm.
that's off the to-do list. We can move forward on a clean slate. The trade-off to all this is exactly what you said. This is all, for the most part, money going out. There's no money
Yeah.
coming in. So you're doing a whole bunch of front end work to get zero return. And that could be hard for people in a certain position. The good thing though is if you're doing another job, if you're not in a rush and you own the land or it's on a cheap lease, you can do all this build out
Hmm.
on the side, the off hours, weekends, and stuff like that, because you don't really need.
Which you're going to be working on the farm anyways. So,
Right.
what's it's if you're going to be doing 60 hours a week, that's almost the equation that I'm looking back now and realizing I was so quick to want to cut time away from the other job to start working at the farm, knowing that the farm is going to have to make up that money, just where our budget, where our finances are. But if I would have said, all right, I'm just going to continue to be at this job until July instead of ending the first Friday, and because I think the first extra day off that I had committed to the other farm was like the first Friday in April, so that I could harvest for the market the next day. And if I would have just said I'm not doing any markets until, we'll say, July, when like my rent and loan repayment kicked in, and I would have had those extra 3 months to be able to focus on build out. The days are getting longer. It's getting a little warmer. It would just be a lot easier. It would give me a chance to maybe go every week to that farmer's market that I'm potentially even already approved for, see what the traffic's, meet the other farmers, go to other markets, because I haven't been able to go to any other farmers markets because I'm essentially nailed down and I'm committed because I've got to go and I got to make money. And so in hindsight, if I'm going to be working 60 hours a week anyways, maybe it would be better to push that off to get a lot of that build out done and yeah, defer some of that gratification of feeling like a real farmer off 3 more months. Because in the grand scheme of things, 3 months is nothing. But in the moment, I think
Right.
partially I was just so one, I wanted to, I had a goal this year is like I was going to be at the market every Saturday and I haven't missed a single Saturday. And still at this point, still want to shoot for that goal. Obviously, even when the market's closed, I'm still showing up. But I think I was just so eager to do that. And that's what it was going to be, a real farmer, that I prematurely pulled the trigger on production and sales and all of that. Because if I would have been able to wait and maybe I had most of my beds done and then production starts and we really hit the ground running in summertime, then it would have been a lot easier to go to restaurants sooner because I can say, hey, I can deliver, as opposed to, yeah, I'm come up with some BS excuse of we're wanting to reincorporate some wholesale stuff. And it just happens to be the timing that now we're doing it. And I would have been able to go and be like, hey, I've got this many heads of lettuce. Do you want it? Because that's been the best way to get in the door with chefs, as opposed to just this sort of hypothetical whatever, because they want to know that you can do it now. And so, but at the same time, I wouldn't have learned what I learned. I wouldn't have been able to get the ebbs and flows to see really what the market potential is at this market. Wouldn't have been able to make the relationships quite as quickly, know that the high demand crops like broccolini, carrots are a lot harder to grow in the summertime here. So those I would have been flying blind on what are probably going to be my two best crops forever now. And like I wouldn't have learned that if I wouldn't have done it. So I definitely don't regret the decisions that I've made. But if I had to encourage young Diego who's wanting to start a farm in 2025, I would definitely say spend more time on build out than you would like to so that you can ensure that you have a good, strong foundation that you can build on for production further down the road.
Yeah. Your first few years, or maybe it's probably years plural, but definitely your first year is a learning experience
Yeah.
and a build out, whether you do that officially as a business or not. So
Mm-hmm.
you could set up your farm a year in advance on the side and feel like I'm not a farmer, I'm not doing anything yet. But if you put some crops on the ground, you're still going to do all that same stuff again the first year and
Mm-hmm.
have to learn that curve. So there's no avoiding this. And I think the wisest thing in a vacuum of life is you start a year in advance, not needing the money, with the goal of getting the farm up and running, and you get it as close to that 80% perfect as you can in year one with no stress of production. You
Yep.
figure out everything. You can practice growing. Like you just put in, if you had, how many beds you have?
Right now,
Or if you built
yeah,
out max?
if we built out max, we're at like 46 beds. But I think just the two main growing areas that will be like the majority of production would be 35 beds with,
Okay.
yeah, the two blocks and the tunnel.
So say you had 46. I think the part people get lost on is they think just because you have 46 beds, you have to plant 46 beds. And you hit on the experience, which I think of the growing experience of what
Yeah.
grows well at different times of year. And I think that's totally true. And I would say people can more or less mimic that in a garden sense
Yeah,
of you
exactly.
put in a small block, plan out a few beds, get used to harvesting, you probably want the practice of harvesting and going through it. And it's just, we can compost it, we can eat it, we can give it away. I don't have to worry about selling it. I'm just doing everything I can versus I show up on the Olympics on day one and here I go, I'm going to compete, but without training the last 4 years for this moment, because I think it's not sexy, all this early on stuff. It
Yeah.
feels like who's the guy? Sisyphus, who just pushes the ball up the hill and can never get it to the top. I might have boggled that up.
I'm not sure. Knowing you, I honestly assumed that you were talking about some like Eastern European basketball player.
Oh, he,
I didn't know where the metaphor was going, but yeah, we'll have to fact check that offline.
yeah, the guy, I forget the guy, he tries to push the ball up and he's cursed or something. He could never get it to the top and he
Yeah,
always keeps pushing him back. But he also does play for a Turkish basketball team at the same
exactly.
time. But that's not sexy. That's not necessarily the most exciting thing. It's you want to lose weight, and part of it is meal planning or meal
Yeah.
prep, or you want to do better at software programming or learn chess. So you like study other people's chess moves and things. That's not playing. It's never exciting. Putting the seed in the ground is the exciting part. And I get people jump to that. You just miss a lot. And it's that Bill Belichick just talked about this with the Jets who suffer in mediocrity forever. And I always get excited about that, but they're just this ready, fire, aim. And that's what I think uncontrolled enthusiasm about starting a business can be. I want to start a farm. I am flippin' excited. I can't wait. I'm going to plant stuff out, but you haven't done any or all the bed prep you have. There's figuring out market streams. You could do market research that first year. You
Yeah.
could volunteer some time on another farm to learn the ins and outs. Business is hard. And like you throw yourself into the fire having to produce from day one, having to do all that build out from day one, and you're doing two jobs. I wouldn't want to be in that position. So I really get that slow it down.
Yeah. And I think to keep the sports metaphors rolling, Crystal Organic has been practice. It was a safe place. I could practice. It's just reps, it's shots over and over again. I know how to harvest carrots. I know how to harvest turnips. I know how to wear the rubber bands on my fingers so that I can harvest kale and make bunches really fast. Like I've got my reps in. And I think the problem was I went from practice and assumed that I was game ready, or I was like, yeah, it's okay. So maybe I'm not like totally ready for the season to begin, but it's, oh yeah, like we'll get there, instead of having that like preseason conditioning. Like I remember back to high school baseball and starting in February, several months before the season started, we're doing 6 a.m. conditioning and we all hated it. And it's none of this has anything to do with baseball. We're just running laps. We're just doing burpees and whatever. But it was, yeah, it was preseason work to set us up for success so that we had the gas and we had the wheels to be able to go later on, like in deep into the summer, into the season. And I really feel like build out is that preconditioning time. Go ahead and get everything established so that once opening day begins, you're ready to go and you can go all 9 innings and you can make it all the way. And so, yeah, looking back, I wish I would have done more of that kind of preseason conditioning. And I assume that just because I had gotten all my reps in, that I was ready to start, ready to go.
It just becomes at that point, the farm is a tool or a toolkit. Everything on the farm is now a tool. It's time for me to produce using these tools. I can move forward. I'm not sidetracked to doing something else. Because it's not just build out a farm, it can also be the build out of all the business infrastructure. You could have your bookkeeping, social media. You can who are the restaurants I want to reach out to? Where's the farmers market I'm going to? All that stuff can be behind you. Now we just focus on going and selling, producing and selling. So I love the lesson of that. I think I don't know that I would do it honestly if I was the farmer, but I think because there's just the temptation to plant is so easy.
That's what in most people's heads, and I would say in most farmers' heads too. Like that, yeah, like sowing, planting, reaping, harvesting, like that's what the job is. And it's not all the other stuff. But yeah, the temptation is super strong. Like and I would probably go with what you said earlier. You can still grow stuff for you, figure out like test drive different varieties, buy 15 different lettuces from Johnny's and figure out which variety of Salanova you really like, instead of just being like, I think this one is probably what will be the best. And then, yeah, there's been so many different things that I've grown this year that are just like, why'd you pick that variety of Napa cabbage? Because it was on sale. So I could afford to buy a good bit of it. And, they have 6 different Napa cabbages and I haven't trialed any of them. I just have this one because it was on sale. And you have that chance to continue to get some reps in and figure out what's going to work. Is it the Tokyo turnip from High Mowing? Is it the actual Hakurai from Johnny's? Is it some other one from this other seed company that you hear about later on down the road? Like there's so many different things that you can do to experiment and try and still be planting and harvesting without having the like monkey on your back of this has to start making money now.
That perceived information, seasonality, thinking frost, when do you get hit by that?
Yeah.
Pest pressure. How does it react to your soil? How does water take to your soil when it's a bed made? Are they drying out? All these things are just valuable. And because if you need that production the first year and if you can't produce, then you're coming up short, which becomes a mental anchor of, oh my God, I could sell more. I just don't have enough production. I'm leaving sales on the table. Where if you have everything built out, it doesn't guarantee production is going to be success because after all, it's farming, weather's involved, nature. but you have the option to open up more beds. It makes a lot of sense. It makes
Mhm.
a ton of sense to have that in place. And McDonald's would not be selling outside the shop off a grill while they build the shop, fully build it out, get it all set up, get people trained, get systems in place. All right, we are ready to go. Open the doors, start selling. So that's a good one. I love that lesson. Any other thoughts on that, or is there another one?
Yeah, I would say along those lines. I guess I already touched on it, but was just, yeah, really give yourself more time to experiment and try things. I found that I backed myself into the corner of deep mulch, no-till, organic, all of these like flashy buzzword type things that are like really sexy in the industry. And so it's definitely small scale right now. And I don't regret any of them. And I will probably continue, I will 100% continue all of them. But it was just one of those things. I hadn't worked on a farm that way. I had one season of doing it at home to really actually see if it works. To like even know if straddling a 30-foot bed feels comfortable. Because I think Jody's talked about it, that it's just, he's a shorter guy too, and it's uncomfortable for him to even straddle it, so he just kneels on the other side. And so and if you've never worked on a farm that grows like that, because I'd say most larger scale farms don't, they're just tractor width or whatever, like you just have no idea. And so I would say, hold everything with an open hand and let your first year, and it all ties together. If you're not beholden to having to really crank out production, you have the freedom to experiment with the no-till. Do some A/B comparisons. Do a bed of carrots where you broad fork the bed first, and then do a bed where you don't, or do two beds of kale where one gets compost and the other one just gets planted into the native soil with spacing, all that sort of stuff. I would say just give yourself more time to experiment and not feel so locked in. And I think I'm just now discovering that. I'm starting to look at like, all right, so why do they do it at Crystal Organic this way? And then we'll take kale, for example. We're doing the equivalent of 3 rows on a 30-inch bed, 8 inches apart for brassicas, kale, collards, all that sort of stuff that you're like when you're picking leaves. I'm realizing that's like super close compared to a lot of guys. A lot of guys might be doing 2 rows, 12 inches, 16 inches apart. Really let those plants have a lot of room to grow out. But I was just going with what I knew. And so now I split up my kale and my collard plantings, and I'm doing some that are on 3 rows, some that are on 2 rows that are 12 inches versus 8 inches. And so I would say give yourself plenty of time to just try stuff, see what other people are doing, or as dumb as it's and simple as it sounds, just follow the directions on the seed packet and not just what JM do or what Curtis do or what the farmer that you work for do. It might be. Do you know the old adage of cutting the ends off the ham?
No.
Do you know that one? Okay, story time, real quick. So there's this woman. She is making dinner for her new family, her new husband, Thanksgiving, and then she has a pan and she cuts the ends off of both of the hams. She cuts both ends off the ham. Husband goes, "Why do you do that?" "I don't know. That's just what my mom always did." So she goes to her mom, "Why do you cut the ends off the ham?" "I don't know. That's just what my mom always did." And then she goes to the grandmother. It's like, "Why are you guys still doing that?" "The only reason I did that was because my pan was too small." And so it's one of those things that oftentimes the things that you're learning or the things that someone else is instructing you to do is because of the constraints on their farm, not because of this sort of universal principle. And so I would say that I took a lot of the things from Crystal Organic as just like gospel truth. He's been doing this for 30 years. So clearly, this is the absolute best way to do it. Even though he never told me that, you just make the assumption and realizing, like, maybe not. Let's A/B compare. Let's try this. Let's try that. And it's taken me a year, but now I'm finally starting to experiment more, try different varieties, pit them next to each other, do one bed of sweet potatoes at 18 inches, one bed at 12 inches, and just see how the yields interact.
So the age-old argument of, is ham actually a Thanksgiving food? I don't think it is, but a lot of people do. So I don't know about that. I think constant experimentation is required in any business, but it has to be limited. If you don't experiment, once you think you figured everything out, zoom, a competitor goes right past you. So you have to tinker. Talking to somebody this morning about product, and I was giving them an idea if we did this or this, and they said, stop. That's level 2 thinking.
Mm.
We're coming up with this idea. Start at level 1. Let's get this out there. Let's figure it out, see if it works, and then we can get cute with it. And this is a huge mistake humans are guilty of, especially voracious consumers of content now between podcasts and YouTube channels and all that. We in this space are super exposed to everything, all the cool things you could do. And people often, I think, lead with the non-important things. This isn't to say that no-till or compost isn't important, but if you're a farm, the most important thing is to get a crop that you can harvest,
Yep.
not to build carbon in the soil. That's great.
Hmm.
And yes, I know it matters. Your goal is to get a product that's healthy that you can sell. Everything else is secondary. And I think in business, it's extremely complex. If you think about what you went through this year, you're a human that's in these types of businesses, a solopreneur or extremely small business, one person doing it all, bearing the weight of the whole business on their shoulders, the mistakes, the
Hmm.
successes, the good, the bad. You also have a family. Families have dynamics. I have dynamic with my wife, my kids, they have issues. Something's always going on. We have houses, things break, life happens. We have ups and downs in life, as we talked about in another episode. That's hard. Be
Hmm.
careful layering on extras that you don't know matter and are this level 2 thinking when your business is level 0.
Yeah.
Get product produced. If you have to just plant it in bare soil and rototill it, and that is fast, it lowers your stress level, it keeps you sane. I can argue that's way better on a sustainability perspective than going some deep compost mulch system that you saw do online.
Yeah.
And those things are great, but a lot of people doing that, listen to some of the stuff Jesse does, Jesse Frost, he's been down the road a while. He's figured stuff out. He has processes in place. He can tinker and do those things. But those are goals I think people walk to. I made a YouTube video on this, and one of my favorite quotes along this is Gregory Landaway. He's a permaculture designer. Says sustainability is a continuum, not an endpoint. A lot of people want to start
Mm.
at sustainable, and they forget that you're working towards it forever over the course of a lifetime. And in business, I don't care what you think is best for the soil. If your books don't show a profit at the end of the year, nothing you do for the soil matters because you're out of
Yeah.
business. And then that's going back to a field or a non-organic farmer that's just going to glyphosate it and get back on with life. So don't overcomplicate things the first year with anything of life. I think that's the hard part of courses and podcasts of, oh, here's all this cool stuff you can do. But there's a
Yeah.
place for that. And it's usually not when you're trying to figure everything else out. And if you stack this onto what we talked about, just your previous lesson of building out a farm, it's if you broad fork every bed and put compost on every bed and then hit it with biochar and foliar feed everything, and maybe you get better crops, but you added all this extra stuff to your to-do list, which is just crazy stressful. So I caution people in the beginning, get the product out, make it
Hmm.
good. in the simplest way possible for your available time, labor, budget, and then get comfortable and then start going or experiment, like you said, in the off season or in this
Hmm.
pre-year, your practice reps year, but not when you need it. When you need to go, it's let's produce. I do love the idea of trialing varieties and stuff, kind of sidestepping a little bit, but on the same theme. Just because somebody else grows it doesn't
Hmm.
mean that it's great for you, your own climate, your soil,
Your customer base.
yeah, your
I've
management style.
there's a couple of crops that I thought were going to be big winners this year. There's stuff that's sitting in the seed house right now that I'm like, I don't think I'm going to plant that because I don't really think it's going to sell. And it's tried and true stuff that's Swiss chard, red Russian kale, stuff that'll grow like a weed. And it just, especially with the red Russian kale, won't miss a beat over the summer or over the winter. And it's, but I did it. I had it last year and it just didn't move. People wanted green frilly kale. They wanted lacinato kale. And it's just like, why try to make it work if it's just not going to? Why not take that extra bed and just dedicate it to one of the other ones that you know will work? Just because Crystal Organic sells the shit out of it doesn't mean that I'm not Crystal Organic. I'm Crop Culture Farm, and Crop Culture Farm's customers don't really seem to want it. And there's been other things that I think I went with my gut on, things like Hockeride turnips that are a kind of a tried and true one, and they were slow, but then it took some work. I have to put slices of them out on a plate every single week, and I have to explain them every single week. But slowly but surely now they've become one, probably my number two. They're tied with arugula is my number two like best selling product. And so that's one of those things where it's sometimes they're tried and true for a reason, and then other times it's just your context is different. And yeah, the only way you're going to know is if you try it with an open-minded approach to realize I'm not married to this. I'm not. And I think that goes back to all the other things. It's don't be married to the form factor of whatever it's going to be. Don't paint yourself into the corner of I have to be no-till because that's the only thing that that really resonates with me, or I have to be 100% organic because that's just what I have to do. And it's like all you're doing is you're just giving yourself more and more constraints and more hurdles that you have to jump over. And yeah, and so there's just certain things that do require a little bit of work to prove them out to be true, that are like tried and true things. And then there's other things that I think are you can pretty quickly realize if they're going to work or not. And if they don't, then all you're doing is just beating your head up against the wall trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole, or a red Russian kale peg fit into a curly kale hole.
I wonder how many people do no-till just so they can get street cred on Instagram because customer doesn't care, your
Yeah.
kids don't care, your wife doesn't care, your partner doesn't care. You care probably only as much as if you can see results and it works. It's not like anti-child trafficking or something to that level where I really care. I don't want that. Or
Yeah.
spousal abuse. That stuff matters. This is a flexible value, I think, for a lot of people. And it's just, you got to be careful in this. You see this in fitness and diet and things like that. There's only one way to do this thing. And if you don't do it this way, you're doing it wrong. Or if you don't eat this and have this morning routine, like you're missing out. And it's just like in food, in exercise,
Yeah.
what can you do consistently? That's the
Hmm.
best program. What do you do that works? That's the best program. I don't care what it looks like. It's what's best for you that you actually stick with, that actually gets you the best results for what you want to see. And at the end of the day, this is a business. I was looking back through the book, forget it. It's that one farm business book that was written in the early 2000s, like the Organic Grower's Guide to Farm Business or something. And he said, grow for profits, not production. And I love that
Mm.
philosophy. You're many times gardener or growers focus on production. Here's how much I can grow. Here's what I can grow. I can grow only red Russian kale. But like you said, if the market's not buying it, that production doesn't turn into profit. So grow for profits. And if you slot in techniques, if you slot in, and this can also be things like excessive social media posting and things that just don't move the needle
Yep.
in the scheme of your business, fancy branding, whatever it is. There's all these little things we get distracted on. What actually gets us to profits at the end of the day? Because if you want farms to be successful, that's the key. It's not how the crop is grown. It's not how the soil's fixed. It's what ended up in the bank account of the farmer at the end of the day. And I'm all for the most money possible going in the farmer's bank account because that does many things for this space. It shows one, people can do this and make a good living. It shows people that what's possible out there and encourages more people to get in. And then they can use those profits to do other things, hire people in their community, donate them to causes, spend time to regenerate the land on their own farm, whatever it is. But until you
Mhm.
have that profit nugget, be careful expensing your own time and labor on things that aren't doing that. Because as you well know, I mean, you're strained on time, you're probably strained on mental bandwidth, and you're obviously strained on finances the first year. And if it doesn't matter, that's where everybody has to have a hard talk with themselves. This is anything in life, not just farming techniques. But if you don't know why you're doing it and you can't, in a very clear, logical way, say, I, I do A, I see the results of B, why do it?
Yeah, I think I was probably one of those farmers that was doing no-till for Instagram clout. It was in my little header, and there was a bit of me that like I think I eventually took it out to basically because I was like no-till, organically grown, regenerate. Like I was trying to use all the buzzwords, and now it says like first year fruit and vegetable farm. And it's just, yeah, because I realize it's like how much of these things I still feel very strongly about those growing techniques. And I feel like I have seen results. But it was one of those things that was like, yeah, man, like how much of this is just because this is like what you should do versus what you've talked about it many times, like just to get a minimally viable product. And yeah,
Yeah.
we definitely added some unnecessary hurdles to getting that. Like we could have just tilled, and I didn't even have to do 30-inch beds. Could have just tilled tractor width beds, filled them with stuff, done it same old way that anybody else does, and probably would have had about the same amount of production as I do now with way less work. The only nice thing is I did a lot of upfront work that I don't have to do anymore. So there's some give and take. I don't have to go in those 26-ish beds that are now formed and hand shoveled out pathways and whatever and composted. The compost will have to get added, so on and so forth. Maybe if I decide to keep going that way, but at least now those are done. And I can at least see it as an upfront investment and not just like totally wasted. But I don't think it increased production this first year because I was so held to my dogma that no one was expecting me to hold to except for myself and
Yeah. Yeah.
Instagram.
Carrying a burden that you don't need. And I don't mean I don't want to beat this point too hard into the ground, but when you start a business, if I'm going to start a farm, I say, all right, what time do I have to work on the farm? If I'm working a full-time job, let's just say a 40-hour week job, I have it's a normal 9 to 5 hours type thing, and I have weekends off. All right, I have nights and weekends
Mm,
free to work on the farm. That's my available now hours that I could work on the farm. Then I'll say apply another filter. How much of that time, if I have a family, am I willing to say I have to leave you behind to go work on this? Then you strip off some time for whatever church, whatever you want to do in there, and that leaves another blanket window of time. You only have so many hours left. What are you spending those hours on? Because they've now become very valuable. You're saying I'm going to take free hours out of my life or away from time when I could do other things with other people, and I'm going to focus on this. How am I getting the most utility out of this hour that I'm using? Am I
mm,
convinced that whatever this is, and this is not just a farm thing, whatever, that this is the most beneficial thing I could be doing right now to get me towards my goals. If you're absolutely convinced it is, and you know it'll pay back, if it's a business, it means if I do this in the future, it's going to save me time, enough time to matter. Not it saves me 2 minutes every time I plant. Who cares? This is going to save me hours. Or in the one huge thing would be landscape fabric. You're going to use landscape fabric. That's going to save you a ton of weeding over the season. But I
Yeah,
hate landscape fabric, how it looks. Okay, then do you love weeding? No. Then you better learn to love the look of black. Will it save you money? Will it save you maybe physical wear and tear? And certain things might have benefits over time. I don't even remember if this is in the last episode or where I talked about it, but it's solar panels on our house. We put them on our house, tax incentive to do it. But the payback period on solar panels is like 15 years.
hmm
So, yes, I get free electricity from the sun, but it pays back 15 years later. You can run that for every tool, task that you do on the farm. And in the early farm stages, those payback periods need to be as short as possible because
absolutely.
you don't have the time and capital to zero with no customer base to say, oh, so payback in 10 years. Let's do that. It's not worth it. So you got to compress that time frame and say, will this help me now? If it doesn't help now, question doing it. Because eliminating work is better than doing is sometimes better than doing work because you're now multiplying that time. I didn't do it, but now I can focus on something better. So instead of wasting an hour, I saved that hour and I did it for something better. So I think that's a 1+1 is 3 type thing. So you just have to be very careful on
Yeah.
what you take on and how you plan. Again, going back to the first thing, a lot of this can be sussed out in that first transition year where you figure things out, where you experiment, where you practice things. Do I like doing this? Is this worth it?
Yeah. Can you, do you actually the day in, day out, week in, week out of it? Do you like being cold and being wet in December, harvesting stuff? And those are some of those things that, yeah, it'd probably be better to figure that out when your livelihood's not on the line than you show up to your first December and you're like, oh crap, I am miserable and I hate this and I can't feel my fingers and I want to quit.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if you talk to Nicholas or somebody of that equivalent. They farm for 20 years or 25 years. So an OG that's done this for a long time. How many years did it take you to figure out most of the stuff? You get to that 80% knowledge. There's that adage of it takes relatively quickly. You can get to 80% to go from 80 to 90. It takes the same or twice as long. And then to go from 90 to 99, it's whatever longer. And then 99 to 100, it's a lifetime. So how long would it take somebody who's farming 20 years to figure out most of the stuff? These varieties, this spacing, this soil. Do you have any guess on what he'd say? Like 10?
That was my knee jerk. I would say 10 years. Now, I will say, I feel like there's still a lot of things that change and ebb and flow and, well, haven't grown this before or haven't grown this in a long time or whatever. But so it's still a fluid system. But yeah, I would say probably 10, maybe 15 at the most.
So think about that. 10 years to figure out most of it and get in a rhythm.
A
Year
long way to
one,
go.
we expect everything to go well. We freak out if it doesn't.
Yeah.
And yet we should be expecting a 10-year learning curve. I've been doing this, well, not podcasting, but running the business since 2017. It's 2024. I think it's 6.5 years technically. I still feel like I'm learning stuff. I still do
Oh, yeah.
stupid things from time to time where I'm like, what was I thinking? Why did I do that? Or I'll have a conversation with somebody else in a related business and I learn something like, wow, that's really smart. Why did I never think of that? So don't feel pressure, I think, to new farmers to feel like you have this sorted out in year one or you've figured it all out in year one. I think it goes back to that episode we did with Rob where he said something like, you survived year one. And that maybe was understated to me at the time, but now when I think about it, that's much more poignant than maybe I gave him credit for. Of if you can survive a year doing this, I don't care what the income statement said,
Mm-hmm.
barring you get blown out and did some stupid things. But if you just did reasonably well, made some money, that's a huge achievement. And
Yeah.
how do you feel for just getting through the last year? Because you started farm build out around this time. Forget the money. Do you feel, am I just like making this out to be something like, that's one thing, Diego, to say it, but I'm doing it and I didn't make as much as I thought. I feel like shit. What do you feel like after a year?
So we signed the lease on October 1st. So it's been just over a year. And I think I attributed it to just the seasonal change. But I've noticed over the last probably week or two that there's been this like newfound ease or sort of peace is probably the best way to put it. Where it's, so we'll take yesterday for an example. I didn't put my eyes on the farm property for a single minute yesterday, which is
That's a big thing to not
that's a
do that.
big deal.
Yeah.
And so it's got up, made breakfast for me, and the boy woke up, made breakfast for him. By the time it was all done, it's could I go over to the farm for 10 minutes? Yeah, but what the hell am I gonna do? I'm just over there just to check the box and it's still there. And then between some other errands and other family stuff, and then decided, no, we're gonna take this evening and we're gonna be a family and I'm not gonna focus on the farm. Yeah, and I got home and realized like I haven't put my eyes on it for a single moment. And instead of being like, oh man, I really should have, I was just like, it's fine. It'll be there tomorrow. I wouldn't have really accomplished much thing of any value anyways, and this is far more important. And I think maybe some of that ease has come from this subconscious realization that it's like you survived this arbitrary 12-month trip around the sun that we kind of mark time with. And yeah, and it almost does feel like I have no idea what sales are going to look like for the next 6 months, really, but I at least know stuff will grow. I know what will grow. Lord willing, we don't have any sort of crazy winter storm. Everything should be fine. And yeah, it was just something like we survived year one and now we can just, okay. And yeah, I would say there's something to that for sure. And the realization that we are now operating with experience. It's still new. There's always a learning curve. There's always something new to learn, but I'm not going into this blind anymore, where everything up until this point has been totally blind. I know what markets look like. I know how chefs work to some extent. I know what's going to grow. I know what weeds pop up when and what those flushes are like. I know how when the fruit trees come on. I know how my landlord reacts to these messes and those if the grass didn't get mowed. I know the rough idea of how this cycle is going to go. And now we're operating with experience. And that's a big deal. It's a huge deal.
People can probably beat themselves up after the first year if you just looked at a bank account or an income statement.
Oh yeah, if I go and look at my business plan for year one and what like my projected sales were, I think I'm probably about $20,000 off, and I've been definitely way off where my projection was going to be. But
That's okay. That's what it's a projection, right? The
mhm,
danger is taking that as an absolute guarantee. I think I'm thinking off the top of my head, year one goals. If you can do this out of year one, running, we'll say a farm in this case, you've succeeded. One, you made it through year one. You're still running the business. You're excited about it. The business shows promise. It's functioning. You're good to go. Two, you didn't make any massive financial errors. This is
no,
not buying a Sprinter van in July after you had your best market and now realizing, oh my God, what did I do?
yeah, yeah,
Your family is intact and there is not increased discontent amongst the family dynamic.
yeah,
Businesses take people from families and use that time for the business that puts household tasks on people who are still in the house and kids. So where are you going? Hey, come back. I want to play. If everybody's still feeling on the same page, in the same direction, nobody hates anybody, there's no seeds of discontent, that's a huge win. You built a customer base that's
Mhm.
consistent. Don't care how big it is, but you have customers that you can say, these are my customers. They come back all the time. You gained experience, whatever that means, and many things. Those are 5 huge wins that if you can check those, that's success. You could create a chart, look at how many beds I planted and harvested. I sold this many units, pounds, units of these crops. I sold to this many customers total. Last year I made 0. This year I made fill it in.
Yeah.
I did this on the farm, built these beds, put in this, put in infrastructure, did all these things. And I guarantee if somebody did that and they stand back and look at the list, they're like, whoa, this is really cool. If you were a
Mm.
kid and did that and brought it home to your parents, like what I did in school today, they're like, what'd you do in school? And what's the common response? No, nothing. Oh, no,
Yeah, nothing.
nothing. Hung out, had lunch. But you brought home this, they're like, whoa, you did all that? That, I mean, be super proud when you show it to most people who are afraid to start a business, afraid to take a risk. And it's, I started a business. This is my proud sheet. Look what I accomplished this year.
Mhm.
It's pretty freaking amazing for anybody that does that because your baseline was 0. And now you got this whole sheet filled up with all this stuff you did. So we should be coming out of a first year saying, look at this. Awesome. Look how good we did.
Yeah.
But it can be mixed. Wanted to do better. Yeah, I thought I would
Oh
make
yeah.
it.
You're always, I feel like I'm just perpetually in that state of like never satisfied, never happy with whatever I did because I'm always thinking like we could have done more. If I would have not screwed up and planted that tray of collard greens in August, would have waited till September or wouldn't have wasted it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. And it's yeah, to accomplish what we've accomplished is pretty damn impressive in spite of all the areas that frankly only I know about. All of those shortcomings were if that would have worked, we would have made an extra $5,000 this year. Or if that would have worked, then maybe I would have not looked like an idiot to that one customer on that one day, one time. I'm the only one that keeps a record of that up here. Everybody else sees the big picture, and I think that kind of ties into my last sort of thing, that a lesson that I've learned this year is just don't take yourself so damn serious. And I'm saying that to myself. I'm looking into that camera and saying it to myself. Whether it's, and maybe this is a me problem, but whether it's like going into the market thinking it's got to be cutthroat and you're looking at all right, here's my competition. It's no, these people can be your friends. These people can be your biggest champions, your biggest supporters, your biggest, in a way. Some other farms could be your biggest customers if they have a big customer base and you can supply them with stuff. You know, have fun, enjoy it, be silly. Don't have to be so calculated and so polished. I was racking my brain. I ended up bringing a few pounds of pretty ugly tomato seconds to the market. Normally, I wouldn't have even put them in the truck. Oh God, no! I only bring the absolute best, grade A, primo product. That's the only stuff I'm going to sell. And somehow I brought some, and I was like, I guess I can sell them. And I'm racking my brain about what I wanted to call them and what do I sell them for. And I'm processing out loud. And one of the other farmers next to me, she goes, "Oh, I sell those. I call them ugly tomatoes and I can charge the same price and people love them." It's just oh, I'm so overthinking it. I'm just putting way too much pressure to be serious and be professional and be polished. And it's just have fun. Don't just enjoy it. Be yourself, be funny, do whatever. just as long as you're authentic, then I feel like that comes through. And I think maybe you're less polished or you're less buttoned up, but I think just authenticity really goes a long way with a lot of people. You'll feel happier. It's one less thing to worry about. And I think it's a net positive in the long run for your business and just for you. Because who wants to walk around being fake?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a business you're doing, probably your family, for yourself. It's something you want to chase. So it's an extension of you. You have to, there's base rules. We have to pay taxes. We have to track expenses. I have to charge sales tax, right? I have to be
Yeah.
professional for certain things. For other things, I don't. You give it your own flavor. And if there's all sorts of experts that will be like, oh, don't do it that way. That's not technically correct. And you just got to do it.
Yeah.
I started making YouTube videos in August. Hadn't done a YouTube video in 3 years. And we were looking into YouTube videos, started looking at some best practices. Oh, here's how you set up the lighting, and here's how you can get a prompter and all that. And your videos should be this length. And I started to go down the rabbit hole. Then I was like, pump the brakes, throw all this in the fire, forget it. Just going to make the bleep word videos I want to make. And if people don't
Yeah.
watch, I don't care. And so it's just, hey, where's the studio? Oh, I'll just set something up in my office. Good enough. I don't think
Yeah.
it matters at the end of the day. And if the video is 50 minutes long, it's 50 minutes long. And people are like, oh, you need to make fast cut 5-minute videos. I don't care.
Yeah.
This is what I want to do, and I'll make it. And if it works, if it doesn't. And I think that is important for content. It's important for your marketing. Every business is going to have its own flavor in farming, including your branding, how you market it, what you grow. There's many market farms out there. And if you just try and be some copycat or bland copy, I think that's where you do risk fading a little bit into the
Hmm.
background of how do you stand out. And it's people who are, I think, authentic. Not doesn't necessarily mean they have to be high volume, over the top to stand out, but it's just if you're doing something that you're passionate about, you selling is no longer a chore because you're talking about something you love or excited about. And then the
Yeah.
customers resonate off enthusiasm, probably more than the product.
Hmm.
So my daughter did a booth at a farmer's market recently selling crochet stuff, and people would talk to her, how, where did all this come from? She'd be like, oh, I made it all. And they'd start, how long did it take? And then I get she's a kid. People wanted to support her, but that was like the story. And then the things that they're buying, they're cute, whatever they want to have them. But it's totally her putting herself out there saying, this is what I love to do. And people resonate with that. And I think that plays into vegetables. You've seen it in some of the reels you do, where you land eventually at, here's the authentic me, and you communicate that way. I think that communicates through how people display produce, how you explain it. And it includes the crops you grow. If ABC said to grow blank and you
Yeah.
grow it and somebody's, what is this? And you're like, oh, that's tat soy. You can put it in salads and you don't
Yeah.
even eat tat soy. Why are you selling it?
Yeah.
Versus it's broccoli sprouts. You're like, nah, I love these things. Sulforaphane. I put them in my smoothie every day. This is why. And people are like, whoa, they capture that energy. That's infectious and that goes. And I think that can also get stunted under stress.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So if you got a lot going on, then it becomes, I don't have the energy, you're deflated. And I think you talked about one market or in one of the other episodes where you started to get thought maybe a little cranky, or I don't know if I'll be doing this much longer thing. And that's the exact opposite energy you need to put out. So I like this point of don't take it so serious. Do what you want to do. That includes your farm style. Again, it might not
Hmm.
be the perfectly correct way to
Yeah.
fill a bed or prepare a bed, but if it's what you enjoy doing, if it works good enough, A lot of times good enough in life is just that.
Yeah, I will say that lesson has partially been learned through experience, but also through being the young buck at the market. The other two like regular farmers, and even another one who's more seasonal, and pretty much every other person at the market is like middle aged. Like their kids are moved out or they're like in college or whatever. And then there's me. And so there's a whole bunch of people who have a lot more life experience and they'll have a lot less perceived a lot less riding on their business than what I am. And I'm over there just amped and just white knuckling every part of life, just trying to make it. And then I can have this lady who doesn't really care about all the stuff that where I'm like getting onto my wife because she didn't put the basket up just right at the display. And she's, oh, just call them ugly tomatoes and charge the same price. And people love it. And I'm just like, ah. So there's something to be said about being around people who have a lot more experience. Someone like Nicholas, who's they're not trying to impress anybody anymore, and they can just be themselves and just tell you like, let me tell you, kid, this is just do what you want to do or do this or whatever. And so some of those lessons, I'm grateful to have kind of older folks around me to that can help me chill out a little bit because I can be a little high strung at times.
I wonder if some of those older people would say it's not as much you as you think. I think people would tell me that at times in my life of
Mm-hmm.
we don't have as much control over our business as we think. At the end of the day, you have a good product. It provides value to people at a price that they're willing to trade. They'll buy it. That's the bottom line. That's
Yep.
how commerce works. It's not fancy price tag you made up to make it look nice or the little bag you put it in. Yeah, all that stuff helps. Stuff helps. But I think we give ourselves too much credit towards success. It's all on me. And it is to management is, I think, really what we do. Picking the right product, presenting it accordingly, pricing it, controlling spending, but it's not maybe, right? Do you think you versus somebody who's a little dialed down would have a big difference in how much you sold on a Saturday? I'm not talking sitting behind the booth, reading a book, never looking up, but somebody who's just more timid. Do you think you account for an extra 50% of sales, just the fact that you're engaging, outgoing, that type of thing? Is there a you effect to that?
I would say there's got to be some for sure. Just, and I would even say probably has less to do with me and it has more to do with the choices that I've made, like choosing to grow without any pesticides, herbicides, like essentially organic. But we haven't done the A/B comparison of where my wife does a market alone and then I do a market alone and let's compare and contrast. But sales still come in. People tell me how much they love her and she's pretty quiet and isn't in people's faces and doesn't feel like she has to give everyone the like tour of the table and explain everything. She can just sit there and be comfortable in silence while people just look and make a decision. And it probably plays way less of an effect than I think it does, where I feel like I have to be like selling, selling, selling. But I would say that kind of my energy, the work that I've put in to make it look like the way it does, has definitely given us an edge. But when it comes to the actual customer interaction, I could probably just stand there and say hello and just be cordial and ring people up in a fast way and be done with it. And it's not like it's going to diminish our sales.
Yeah, you have buyers, non-buyers, and people on the fence, and your energy helps people on the fence come over to the buy
Yeah.
side is probably where it ends up. But yeah, I like that of just don't take it so serious. Business isn't that hard. The execution part, it's not, it's a lot of simple things done well repetitively. The hard part is choosing what to do when, I think. So it's in a farm context, do I plant crop A or B now if I only have one bed? it might not sell that well. Do I harvest it and take it to market, or do I just till it in? That's, I think, the hard part. And that comes with it, that gets easier over time. But a lot of this is just harvest it, wash it. Let's not be too hard here. That's pretty simple
Yeah.
stuff, right? You just,
Yeah.
anybody you can train to do it. There's not much value adding. We only help certain parts of the business at the management side of things. So this is, I think the takeaway I'm getting from this episode is year one, survive, it's gain experience, and you're on a long experience learning curve here. The more experience you can gain, the easier it gets, and you become that old lady at the market who's just, call them ugly tomatoes, same price, and they're good to go. And she's
I hope
not
she doesn't listen to this because she's not that old, Diego.
older lady.
Yeah.
She's younger than me. How about that? So if I see you,
I don't think she's younger than you, but
okay.
yeah, she's not. She doesn't listen to the podcast. I don't even think she knows how to do a podcast.
Well, if she doesn't know what a podcast is, then she's definitely a lot older.
Yeah.
All right. That, I think, will wrap this one up. Thanks for joining me. Thanks everybody for listening to this. We're coming into the end of 2024. We'll keep you posted in terms of what the show does going into 2025, but thanks for listening.